Hi, hello, and if you're new to the channel, welcome, and if you've been here before, welcome back. Now, this is a video about narrowboat toilets, and if you've watched any of my previous videos about narrowboat toilets, you will know that I started off with a Thetford cassette toilet on board, which I wasn't a great fan of. I then tried the Trelino separating toilet, which I really liked, but I did find that it had a limitation, and that was emptying the solids container. There was no easy way to do that. And then I came across, thanks to one of my viewers suggesting it, came across something called the GottaGo toilet. Now this is a separating toilet. It separates urine from solids, but the big difference is the solids go into a container, which is sort of almost Thetford cassette-like. It's a solids wet container, as opposed to the Trelino where it's a sort of dry container. Now, as I said, I like the Trelino, but the problem was disposing of the solids when I was out cruising. So I thought that the GottaGo would be the answer because it was more like a sort of traditional Thetford cassette toilet and I could empty the solids in the Elson points out on the canal. So anyway, I've been trialing, I've been testing the GottaGo for the last few months, about 6 months now, I guess. And in this video, I'm going to go over my findings, and at the end, so stick around to the end, I'll let you know which one of the two toilets I prefer. Anyway, toilet time. Okay, so these are the two toilets. On the left is the Trelino separating toilet, and on the right the GottaGo. And in this shot you can see the urine cassette and also the wet solids cassette for the GottaGo toilet. Essentially the two toilets are the same in that they are separating toilets. Now the Trelino toilet is the more expensive of the two, and one of the features that it has is a soft closing lid. I don't know why, but I just find this a really nice feature of the toilet. The Trelino toilet has two areas for separating waste, a front urine container and a solids waste container at the back. And it's a very comfortable toilet to sit on, and it's surprisingly warm on a cold winter's night. For some reason, I always struggle to gain access to the Trelino toilet. The top fits very well, and getting the top off can be quite tricky. You only have to do this, obviously, when you need to empty the solids container or the urine container. Inside the Trelino, it's fairly simple. There is a large solids container and a large urine container. But one of the things I like is that inside the Trelino, there are no sort of nooks and crannies for bacteria or things that make a smell to lurk in. So it's very easy to keep clean and smell free. The urine container is about 10 litres and can hold between 18 and 22 Ps. And with the average adult producing 800 to 2,000 mils of urine per day, this means that this container could do one person for up to 5 days, if not more. Two advantages of the 10-litre container are the small rubberized valve at the top that helps keep smells down, and also the large entrance to the container, which means that when you screw the lid off, it's very, very easy to pour out and doesn't tend to glug. The downside of 10 litres, of course, is it's going to weigh about 20 pounds, just over 20 pounds, so it's quite heavy to carry around. The solids container is essentially a bucket in which you put a bag containing the drying agents such as coconut husk or wood chips or even shredded paper, and it can hold between 11 and 20 deposits, shall we say. So that's going to last you at least a week before it needs emptying. Okay, so what about the cheaper GottaGo? Here I've got the GottaGo. The large cassette at the back right is the composting cassette, same idea as the Trelino, and the cassette in front is a urine cassette. Inside the Trelino, I've got the wet solids cassette at the back there. Looks a bit like a Thetford cassette and a urine cassette. And I had to get another urine cassette because the urine cassette only holds about 4.5 to 5 litres, so roughly half the volume of the Trelino. In other words, it doesn't last very long, a couple of days, 3 days maximum for an adult. The cassettes are very easy to take out. The urine cassette, as it only holds half the volume of the cassette in the Trelino, is half the weight, and the wet solids cassette just lifts out. And this does reveal one of the limitations of the GottaGo toilet. That is, there are lots of nooks and crannies inside the toilet, and it can be quite difficult to keep it clean. Another issue is the hole through which the urine flows into cassette. This gasket here that you can see in the middle of the shot is very difficult to keep dry and clean, and there's often a collection of urine around it. Now, one odd feature on the GottaGo is it has a toilet seat. And I just don't understand why it has a toilet seat, because everybody sits down on the toilet to go. So why have a seat that you can lift up? Also, it's something else that has to be cleaned. Whereas with the Trelino, it's all built into the top and very easy to wipe down. Also, the toilet seat seems to be of a harder and colder plastic than on the Trelino. Now, one feature I do like on the GottaGo toilet are these little sort of fuel gauges that tell you when you need to empty the urine cassette or the wet solids cassette. Rather annoyingly, these gauges sit on empty for a very long time and then suddenly shoot up to full. Kind of reminds me of my first car. It used to be on a full tank of petrol for a long time, slowly getting down to half full and then suddenly dropping from half full down to empty in the shortest space of time imaginable. Now, I've not yet used the composting cassette on the GottaGo toilet, but I imagine it's going to be very, very similar to that on the Trelino. In other words, you put a bag in and you put your drying agent in the bag. Now, with the urine cassette, I do like the fact that the cap not in use can also be screwed onto the top of the cassette, although I do live in fear that it's going to pop off and go down the Elson point. The biggest problem with the urine cassette is it has a small opening, which means it's impossible to empty it without it glugging, which means it's going to splash, and to date I've not been able to empty the cassette without some urine dribbling down the outside of the container. To break up the solids in the liquid, I've been using biological detergent tablets and oxy powder, and these have worked great. I've had no smells from this toilet. However, I have found that I do need to rock the toilet to encourage the breakdown of any lumpy bits. And if I don't do this, it makes it difficult to empty the cassette. So what's my verdict? Which of the two do I prefer? Do I prefer the GottaGo or the Trelino? I actually prefer the Trelino over the two because it's easier to keep clean. I like the soft close lid. I know that seems to be a really odd thing to sort of focus on, but I do like that soft close lid. And one weird thing I've noticed, as I said earlier, is that I actually find the plastic a bit warmer to sit down on, and it's easier to keep clean than the GottaGo. The GottaGo's got some good features. I do like the sort of fuel meter thing there that sort of says how full the tanks are, but they are weirdly sensitive, as I sort of said earlier. Very difficult to keep the interior clean. On a narrowboat, one of the things that does happen, and it is quite weird, is if you leave a separating toilet for a while, you get condensation. If you haven't been on the boat, you get condensation on the tanks in there, so you get sort of runoff on the outside. And you don't know if that condensation is spillage or if it's actually just condensation. So from that point of view, it can be a bit disconcerting. And I find it quite difficult to sort of clean around inside the GottaGo. It's quite fiddly to get in there. The biggest drawback for me with the GottaGo, and this is where the Trelino really wins out, is the urine container. The urine container is really far too small on the GottaGo. I can fill that up in, well, a couple of days, even less sometimes. And so you're constantly sort of thinking about emptying the urine container, and that's why I bought another urine container, is because I kept filling the thing up so quickly. So in an ideal world, I would like to stick with the Trelino. I like the composting element of it. If there is a way to dispose of the composting side of things, which I never had an issue with smell with that at all, I would stick with the Trelino. However, because of the disposal problems with the composting side of things with the Trelino, I kind of prefer the GottaGo with the sort of liquid disposal. Okay, there's some issues there with, you know, disposing of the liquid and what have you, but it means you can dispose of it pretty much anywhere on the canal. It's easy to deal with. Anyway, hope you found that useful and interesting. Yeah, slight toilet possession, but never mind. It does seem to be a common theme with narrowboaters. So thanks for watching for this long. If you found this interesting or enjoyable, please don't forget to give it a like, a big thumbs up. It really does help the channel. And if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing. On the screen now, you'll see a QR code, which if you scan it will take you through to a newsletter about the Grey Wagtail. There's also a link to it in the description. Again, thanks for watching for this long. Bye for now.